Visiting Wilkes County on business or pleasure? Stay in Wilkesboro at the Holiday Inn Express, Hampton Inn, or Red Roof Inn and Suites. Enjoy Southern hospitality, cozy rooms, and a complimentary breakfast. Explore the mountains and then relax with us. You've earned it. Closed captions for this episode of Life in Wilkes is brought to you by Deal Insurance Agency in Wilkesboro, an award-winning, experienced, family-owned and operated agency with service and coverage that goes above and beyond expectations. Join us on a captivating journey as we explore the charm, history, and vibrant culture of Wilkes County. Discover the hidden gems, inspiring stories, and remarkable people that make Wilkes a place worth knowing and celebrating. Join us now and experience the unique essence of Life in Wilkes.
Steve Palmer, good to see you again.
Good morning. Good to see you again, Carl.
You know, we had a great part one of the City Florist and Steve Palmer story. It's and we've gotten really good response to it. It touched a lot of memories for people. You're not surprised at that, are you?
It did for me too. And one of my cousins, that her mom and dad, the mom worked in the florist, the dad worked in the greenhouses, and we've always been fond of each other, and but not really stayed in touch that much over the years. And I sent that to her, and she came back to me and told me what it meant to her, and some of the and how much her dad enjoyed working there, right. And how much she enjoyed seeing my mom and dad, and listening to her, Carl, it just mirrored the reflections that I have thinking back on that, and as young kids, we both felt much the same about it. And I told her, I said it was kind of validated, for me, how I felt about it, right. Because when she saw it, she just gushed back with, almost those same thoughts as mine. So it was kind of neat.
Memories are amazing, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
And it's nice. I mean, we don't always have great moments and that we have memories of, but if we stack it in our favor and make sure there are a lot of good ones, it makes life easier.
Yeah. Life is not not a perfect picture, but there's if you're fortunate to have had a good family and good experience, there's plenty of plenty of good there.
That's right. That's a better place.
Have to remember it.
That's a better place to live
and share it. I've always tried to share that with my kids and family. So some of these stories I know, they can tell you the same stories because I've sat around and told them, because I wanted them to know about their grandparents and their great-grandparents, that, fortunately, my granddad, which was their great-granddad, had already passed, but my grandmother that started the florist lived with us the first 5 years, the last 5 years of her life, and it was the first few years of my kids' life, and it was just such a good experience.
So your grandmother is the one that actually started the florist?
Started the florist, yeah.
What year was that?
1939.
Okay, so your grandmother started the florist. So in Wilkes County, do you know if that was common for women to? I mean, that's entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah,
she became a business owner. Were there a lot of women business owners in the county at that time?
I really don't know. I mean, that was 15 years before my time.
Yeah, before
I was born. But she was. She was, part of, not just part of, but she was the spark that started that business. Evidently, someone they lived in Wilbar when my parents were young, and my great, my grandparents were. One of them was born there, and another one I think was born over in Caldwell County and moved over here to do some of the lumber business. One of my granddad's uncles was one of the men that was involved with Meadows Mills and some of the early patents out there for the sawmill, and he was involved in the flume when it was built. And evidently he enticed my great-granddad to move his young family over here, and they surveyed and sought out a lot of these virgin forests up around the all around the rim of the mountain, and up up in Wilbar. I know they saw it up there. They saw it up towards Sparta, and I've got so many interesting stories from my granddad. But he told me that when he was about 12, he actually they let him ride one of the logs on the flume.
Wow.
And they nailed or screwed a bunch of logs together so they would flow better, but he rode one from up at the foot of the mountain down to here.
Do you remember what he said about that?
No, he just said it was, just quite an experience, seeing that, riding above the, riding above the river and floating all the way down. And evidently there were, if you go up the old Jefferson Pike, there's a road that parallels it, and you see a lot of places that there was a little access road that paralleled the river, because they had to be able to get at that flume, according to Pop Palmer, if if the logs jammed up or something.
Sure.
And so he rode that down, and there were people, all through there at different places. He said it wasn't like he felt he was alone, but he said, that was some experience, and I thought so too.
Well, who knew that Wilkes County had the first amusement park?
Yeah. Well, my granddad was interesting. He died in 1978, and he lived, the house on the hill there across from the old Union School, now the church up there, and the back porch. Looked down the road, and you looked up and you saw the Brushy Mountains, and you saw the lights on the tower up there.
Right.
So many a time I sat on that back porch and talked to him about all kinds of things.
We know that a lot of work was required at that time.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of good stuff, right? I mean, what you're describing, just imagining how exciting it was at that time. Yes, work, but the opportunities to really make a difference by creating a community.
Yeah, but I talked to Pop one time before he died, and I was, I knew he was getting old, and he was getting feeble, and he was on the back porch, and he just kind of held court there. Some of the workers would come out and talk to him, and I would always go by, and we'd stop and talk there, and didn't go in the house lots of times. And I think he just sensed it was a year before he died, and he just sensed that I was worried about it. And he said, look, don't worry about me. He said, I've seen it all. He said, I was born in 1901. I saw horse and buggies. I drove a horse and wagon in the sawmill business to start with. We had the first T-models trucks around there, so we were driving T-models, and he could work on them. He said, I saw that. He said, I was too young for the First World War, but I saw it. I was too old for the Second World War, so I didn't have to go.
Right.
But I saw that. I saw airplanes. I saw jets. I saw them put a man on the moon, if they really put him on the moon. He said, but I saw all those things. So he said, I've seen it all, and I've had a great life. So don't be sad for me,
When you reflect on that now as you're telling that story, I mean, how does that make you feel inside, knowing that that's part of your heritage and so many other people in this region? How precious is that memory for you?
Oh, it is. But, Pop Palmer always had, he loved those old vehicles. So he had, 4 or 5 or 6 old cars or trucks all the time. And it wasn't like they were jalopies. He would take one and, back before a lot of people were doing it, he'd do a nuts and bolts restoration, take it completely apart, sandblast the frame, repaint it, rebuild everything. They were like new cars.
Can you imagine doing that to your car today?
Yeah. Yeah, because
your new car, your current car.
Yeah.
How many parts there would be?
Oh yeah. But so my cousin Mike that I mentioned in the last film has one of those cars still. He has a 31 Ford Roadster. Pop Palmer gave, Mike's dad one, my dad one, Mike
Does he
one,
drive
and
it?
me one. He used to drive it some.
Oh, I
haven't seen
about
it in a while.
that. I hadn't seen him drive that.
But my car, the one he gave me, was a 1913 brass T-model.
Okay. You still have it?
I do not. But I grew up riding in it. My kids grew up riding in it. Ann and I would take them for a ride. And Sunday afternoon, that engine just had this soothing sound to it, and we would take the kids out riding, and if there was anybody still awake after 30 minutes, it was only Ann and I, and the kids were all asleep, and we were and we got to talk. But nice. I grew up seeing those things. And another cool story about my granddad, he kept up with all that stuff. Those steam traction engines, he had he always kept one or two of those, and they worked. I've seen them run. And the T model, when trains used to run in and out of town here, they were delivered to the depot in the 50s and 60s, and they took some stuff in and out of American Drew. And the last one that ran as a steam engine, they were starting to mix in diesel engines. And when I was a kid, probably 5 years old, the last steam engine left town that day, and my granddad found out about it. So he brought the T model down and put the top down, and he and I were sitting at the crossroads of the rail, right in front of where Domino's is today.
Okay.
And when we were sitting there, and the steam, the conductor came out, and that was the last one that was ever going to run here, the last steam engine. And I thought that was cool. And when the engineer saw that and saw that old car, oh man, he pulled down on that whistle, and that memory's just etched into my mind. And he was good at creating a memory like that.
So he was. That's interesting what you say. So he knew when moments were special.
Yeah.
And he wanted to make sure. Were you there often for those moments, or was that something he did with all of his kids and grandkids?
I was there because we lived with them until I was 11, and then we only moved 200 feet down the road. And Mom and Dad built a new house, and we moved there. But so I grew up with them, and I saw them more than the other grandkids. They loved them all, but I just saw them more, so I was probably there for more of those.
Right, you got to,
little experiences.
You were close by to get in the car, weren't you?
But I'd been around him so much. He would take me places with him when he was young, hunting old car parts, and it was always an adventure. Right. And you always saw something new. And I remember when Ann and I first started dating, and the T model hadn't run since I was a kid, and I was working on it. And it was a Sunday afternoon, and Pop Palmer wanted to go to somewhere up, beyond Boone, over at Banner Elk, looking for an old graphophone or some old radio or something. So Ann said, "Well, I'll take them, Steve, and you stay and work on your car." Now, Annie had never been out of town except on a Wilkes Central activity bus. Right. But Pop says, I'll get you over there. So, they left about 1:30. Well, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. They didn't get home till 7. And I said, where have you been, Annie? She said, I really can't tell you. She said, Pop Palmer took us up in the mountains, and my grandmother couldn't hear well. And she's sitting in the back reading the newspaper the whole time. And so she said, Pop got lost and said he was saying, turn here, little girl, turn there, little girl. So they're over in behind Boone, supposedly. And she said, I pulled up on this big road, and it was a 4-lane road, and I thought, that's out of place. Right. And she said, I went about a half mile, and it said, Tunnel Road, Asheville, 3 miles.
So
Pop had got them lost, and they ended up in Asheville.
Oh, my goodness.
No, they had to navigate back. So, there's just so many stories with him, and as he got older, he was so good with directions, but that day, not quite.
Yeah, well, everybody has a misstep on the directions. I think we've all done that.
She said, Pop, it says, you got to hear this. She said, Pop, it says Tunnel Road, Asheville, 3 miles. She said he never even, lost a thought. He said, golly, he said, the old woman's been in the back rattling those papers and got me lost. So he had enough wits about him to blame it on the only one that hadn't said a word the whole trip probably was Mom Palmer, and he blamed it on her.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, what a great story.
Yeah.
Wow. So many great memories. You'd sent me a picture that I'm glad you sent a note of what it was about, but it was an old service station on Main Street. And if I understand, that's something that you bought back in the day, right?
That was the Howard Brown service station. It was originally an Esso, and then, of course, in the 70s changed to Exxon. Mm-hmm. But that was right across from the florist, so we used them a lot. We bought all our fuel there, or, most of it. There was another one in the parking lot next to where the Australian guy runs the restaurant there.
Oh, the Wombat.
The Wombat.
Right.
In the parking lot of the Wombat where he has the carpet down, that was another service station. That was an Amoco. So we bought some gas there too, but most of the time it was across the street at the Exxon that you saw the picture of.
Okay.
And when they did the urban renewal in the town during the, early 80s, that building was torn down, and there were a lot of lots torn down, and they had an auction, and I attended that auction, and I bought that building and lot, and I bought the one next to it that's next to the B Street Park.
Okay.
So Ann and I own both of those, and many a time, when I would come in from, I commuted Appalachian, and I would come in, and sometimes I would, I always parked over there, and I would, if they weren't busy, it would be Howard that owned it, and a couple of the guys that worked for them, Jerry was one of them. I can't remember the other guy's name.
So you grew up with knowing the guys that run the service station. Then it was across the street from City Florist.
Yeah. So
that's where you got your gas. So when you got the land and the auction, was the building still there?
The building was gone. But
okay.
It was that building was built. It's built into the ground. The back wall and the side wall were underground, and it was an 8-inch solid pour of concrete around the back and the side wall. So everything was torn down but that, and the concrete floor was still there. Everything else was gone.
So the building that's there now, did you build that building?
We built that building,
okay.
And we actually, Ann started a hair salon in late 1978, and it was across from the Miller's Hot Rod Barn where the finance store is now, the little finance place. So she rented there a few years, and we were looking for a lot, and when that came available, I bid those two off. So we built that building, and we actually used those two concrete walls, and we leveled up the top of them and finished a run of cinder blocks across the top and down the side, but those original concrete walls are still there, and it held some significance to me because they were always so good to me, and again, I'd come in and talk, and if they were sitting there, in that little corner concrete wall, there was you could pull your car up in there, and that's often what I did. But they'd be sitting on that wall looking at the florist, and I'd stop 5 minutes and talk to them, and it was always fond memories of how good they were.
So it was sentimental for you.
It still is. Yeah,
I can tell by the way you're talking about it. Good memory. You're smiling because those are happy moments. So your wife she had her salon there as well? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. How long did she keep her salon there?
We ran it. She's had a lot of health problems, and we opened up in '85, and she ran it until till 1991, and she got kind of sick, and she was out for a year, and then she went back in 93 and 4, and she hasn't worked since. But we ran the business as an absentee owner. That was another one of my little hats.
Right.
While I was at Lowe's, I was looking in on the florist and later on the florist, but we owned Ann's shop, and we ran it till 2005, and then we rented it to Julie Hamilton for J. Jules from 2005 until last September. So it's been a hair salon all along, and it's a nice custom-built shop, nicely built inside, and kind of a very modern look inside, as opposed to the antiques that Ann and I usually like.
Migrate toward.
It was a real modern-looking building, and still is. A lot of angles, a lot of arches, and it's kind of a cool change.
Yeah, get your hair cut over at the service station.
Yeah, get your hair cut over at the service station.
Yeah,
so,
I love that story.
Kind of fun things, and and it was I was the only child in my family, so Mom and Dad always wanted a little girl, and Ann was their little girl. So. There she was working across from them, and they would go over and see her. And when Dad went to the greenhouses, he would always stop back in and say hello to her. And
keeping family close.
Yeah,
love that story. Now, so that building now has a new life, but your florist building, that building has a lot of history too. But some of that history got destroyed, didn't it?
That building was built in 1910, and like many of the buildings in town, the front facade, the original brick was painted. But when they did that urban renewal, part of it, if you wanted your building clean, they came in and sandblasted it. So it's at no charge.
Back to the original.
And when you get back to that original facade, it's a nice, kind of ruddy red brick, and it actually, instead of standard, mortar mix, it had a, kind of a red mortar mix. So it's got a unique look to it. And, they cleaned that up in the early 80s. And fortunately, when the building burned, again, it burned out most of.
And what year was that?
That was 1999.
Okay.
It burned out most of the main floor. But I was careful to, we could have just torn that front wall out, but I was careful to maintain that front wall, to maintain that look, which I liked. We put in new windows, of course, and everything else was new floor. The only thing that survived was the front facade, and the roof structure survived. So we kept that.
What happened? Were people working there at the time, or were they...
Well, like I mentioned earlier, one of the ladies comes in. She comes in a little later, and she works a little later, and they'll get the casket sprays or a few things done ahead for the next day. If it's a spray that needs to go over to the funeral home first thing in the morning, she'll stay late and do it, so it's ready to go. And when she left, she saw some smoke. And she made 2 calls. She called me, hey, you better get down here, and she called the fire department. So when I got there, we went to the back alley, and because that's, she saw the smoke over the back of the building, and the fire department was there, and they were just trying to get in. It was full of smoke, and I remember they put a fan in there blowing in, and I said, guys, I don't know if that's a good idea or not. One of those huge 3 or 4 foot fans.
Is that the original fanning the fire? Is that where that came from?
Yeah. I said, why don't you blow it out? Well, this will blow it and it'll blow back out. And I said, yeah, but you may be fanning the flame. So sure enough, the next day when we got to go in there, the fire started in the middle of the building, and it kind of blew it to the forward. So the forward floor, the steps from the mid floor down to the basement was completely burned up, and it burned that forward floor because it kind of blew the flame up front. But I remember standing there and watching about 30 minutes while they were doing, and God bless North Wilkesboro Fire Department. I mean, I've had need for them a couple of times, and they're always there, and they always get the job done.
Right.
And I was thankful to have them there. But after about 30 minutes, I realized, this is, everything in there is fresh and clean. But now 30 minutes of fire and smoke, and it's done. And I can remember it was, it was in the fall, and everybody had a jacket on, and I was standing next to the young girl that answered the phones and updated the computer. And while everybody was standing there watching, I looked over and I said, "Show me what's in your pocket." She said, "Huh?" I said, "Show me what's in your pocket." And she pulled out a nice shiny CD, and I said, "Is that today's update?" She said, "That's tonight's update." And I said, "Good girl," because that meant that we had a big accounts receivable at the time. We don't today, but because we don't really run charge accounts except for a few businesses. But she had backed up. The computer was burned and the hard drive was messed up, but she had backed that up.
So you had the data.
So when I saw we had the data, I said, "Well, I'll see you guys tomorrow." And they said, "Where are you going?" I said, "You may not know it." I said, "This show's over." Mm-hmm. They said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm riding around town to see where the open buildings are, so I'll know who to call tomorrow." And that's what I did. I went and looked for open buildings, and the next morning I started calling, and I'd made a few calls and actually went and looked at a couple of buildings. And Roger Wright, who lives in Blowing Rock now, but he ran Roger Wright Clothiers, which was a clothing store there where Talia's is now. Mm-hmm. And, I always traded with Roger and always knew him and thought the world of him. He was a nice man and still is. But Roger called me that morning. He said, "I heard what happened." And he said, "That whole bottom floor, 5,000 square feet, and that's what the shop is. It's 5,000 square feet up and down." But he said, "That whole floor is available to you if you want it." And he said, "If you do, I'll make you a price on it, and you can go look." And I said, "Well, I think so, Roger." I went and looked. So I went out there and looked, and, the little metal stair structure that's on the back of that building today, I had built so we could get into the building from ground floor, because it was like a loading dock, and I had that built. And we actually, the fire was Tuesday, and we were back up and we did some funeral flowers on Friday with the help of some friends using the big cooler and doing some work out of their place. And we did a wedding on Saturday. We had somebody call, "We got a wedding, you going to be able to do it?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am, we do it." And within 2 weeks, we were back. We were into Rogers. We bought a modular cooler like you see on the back of a grocery store, one of those big aluminum modular coolers. We bought that and put it in, and fortunately, it had some shelving in from, when it was a clothing store, so we used a lot of that. And
so you were in business.
And we were back in business in 2 weeks, and we stayed there two years while we redid the shop.
Right. So let me. So I understand. So the floor that you were on, is it the street level floor?
We were on not the front street level floor, but we were on the floor that was. Our main entrance was on the back alley.
Okay, so that's where they have their downstairs venue.
They have that little downstairs venue. So
that was City Florist.
We occupied that, and that was City Florist for 2 years. Mm-hmm. And
did you, other than a few days, did you miss a beat? Was everything back to normal within a few weeks?
Yeah, a few people, wondered, what happened, and we were just running ads, and very fortunately, we owned Ann's business and her building. And so my sister-in-law I called her the customer service manager, because she ran the front and interfaced with the customers and was on the phone most of the time, and that was what she did. And so we called the phone company the next day and had them to run us a couple extra lines into Ann's business. So they shared the front counter with Pat, and within a day we had the City Florist phones routing over there, and they routed there for 2 weeks. So we were still taking orders, and when somebody called in, 60%, 50-60% of that business is call in, and and now it's call in plus online orders.
Sure.
But people were calling in, and they didn't know if it was in the old building or it happened to be in in Ann's building, and then in 2 weeks it moved back over
did
there.
it? Right.
You had somebody cheerfully saying City Florist on the line when you called in, and that's all that mattered. So
Right. Did you ever find out what caused the fire?
I did. So the next morning, I took an hour off of work to go over there, and the SBI fire inspector was there, and I started to walk. Oh no, you can't come in. I said, well, why? Well, was fire an accident, or was it? I said,
Right.
Of course. Or was it set? But I waited outside a while, and he came out and he said, you can come on in. And he said, you want to know what caused your fire? And I said, well, yeah, I sure do. And he said, well, when was this building wired? I said, well, in the 1910, 1920, but it was rewired, in conduit in the late 50s when we moved in. And downstairs was old style, the big fat fluorescent bulbs with the old style ballast in them. And he said these ballast, cause a lot of problems. And he said, look here. And there was a they were 8-foot fixtures, and the fixture was sitting on the floor, but there was 15 feet of conduit connecting it to the next fixture, ground up to the wall. He said, see that floor joist up there? And I said, yeah. He said, well, look at it. It's charred out. And he said that ballast had been overheating for months or years.
Wow.
And it finally charred out. And and you could see it. It was kind of a, crescent moon look out of that floor joist. And he said when that thing came loose, it hit the ground right here and caused a spark. He said, you got any idea what was there? And I said, not only do I have an idea, I know exactly what was there, because I was down here yesterday and I walked downstairs to get something from Dad, and we were starting to get in stuff for Christmas. It must have been about October. And I said there was a full box with the side cut out of it so we could get into it of Spanish moss. And that stuff's dry,
sure.
and we used it to go around the top of potted plants to make them look nice. And so he said, you're telling me this thing hit right beside that, and that's where the spark went? I said, that's where the spark went. So by that time, that next morning, the wooden stairs were gone. Of course, that box was burned. He said, what else was there? And I said, we had about 10 boxes of pine cones. So he said, and I said, the funniest thing to me was half of those pine cones were just shellacked pine cones, and they were still in the box.
Right.
And of course, the box with the Spanish moss was gone. The box with the pine cones was gone, but there was another about 4 boxes. These are boxes about 2 or 3 feet long and about 18 inches wide, just pine cone after pine cone stacked up in them. And the right box, about 4 boxes, had been dipped in flame retardant. And the cardboard cartons were burnt off, Carl, but those things were laying there, and they looked perfect. They looked new.
The retardant worked.
You couldn't even tell they were burnt. I mean, it just burnt the box off from over them and under them, and there those 4 boxes of pine cones stacked up. So if you wonder whether the flame retardant works, yeah, it works. I thought that was the funniest thing. It just looked out of place. Everything else burned around it, but those pine cones sitting there looking fresh and new. It was kind of comical.
I guess, unfortunately, the SBI agent who was investigating the fire, that's a common thing probably in a lot of older buildings that we think we've got them upgraded right, but every now and then something doesn't work right.
But
does it?
who knew? But he said that happens a lot with those old ballasts. They were big, and he said they get hot, and he said when they get old, they overheat. So everything in there now is an electronic ballast. And in my house, it's, I had electronic ballast, but I've converted everything over to LEDs, so there's not even a ballast these days. But
no, very little heat comes off of anything now, right?
That kind of freaked me out, and I thought, well, I don't want that in my house, so I changed over to electronic ballast in my house.
So
after that, yeah.
So that's the fire. And let's wrap up today's visit with something that we've talked about before, and that are your people. You've got some people that have worked with City Florist for a long time, some of which were with you and went through that fire situation,
yeah,
right?
Many did, yeah. Well, Mom and Dad worked there, 5 decades. And, there was a family that our family knew and met, family of, 10 or 12 kids, I guess. And 3 of those worked for us over the years. One of the ladies, Shirley White, worked there either 52 or 54 years.
Wow.
And still came back 2 weeks a month. She came back for a week right before, Christmas. Really, she probably worked 3. She came back for a week at Christmas, a week at Valentine's, and then a week at Mother's Day. Okay. And I can remember. So she retired in 2010, maybe at 54 years, and she was still working for us in 2018 and 2019 when I was the manager over at the shop. And WD, her husband, had worked there as a delivery driver too when the shop burned. And WD would bring her in the morning, and I would tell Shirley, look, I know you don't feel great. I appreciate you coming, but whenever you're ready to go, if it's 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, you just look at me and say I'm ready, and I'll stop what I'm doing and I'll take you home.
Wow.
So she worked, 10 more years for us, 3 weeks a year, doing that. And finally that last year, I worked 2018 and 19 there. In 19, I said, Shirley, you just don't feel good, do you? And she said, no, I don't. I knew she wouldn't be back, and she's not been back. But think about it. She worked there 50-some years and another 10 coming for the holiday, and always in good cheer.
Well, that's 5 decades.
Yeah. Oh, it was 6 decades counting the part-time.
All right.
But Stacy, who's our lead designer now, has worked there 33 years.
Right.
And I remember I hired Stacy. I would come down and, do interviews for people when Dad needed somebody, and she hadn't met my mom, and Mom was still, feeling good at the time. And so I told her, well, you'll be working with my mom's a little old lady in here, and she'll teach you the things that my grandmother taught her.
And she's still there now?
Stacy's still there now.
Okay.
But after about 3 weeks, I came in one day, and Stacy said, you told me I'd be working with your mom, this little old lady. And she said, what on earth were you talking about? She said, she's a ball of fire. She's got more energy than I've got, And I said, well, I didn't want to say it that way. But, yeah, she would just run up and down those steps, Right. And we all made so many trips up and down those steps to the storage below. And now, when we redid the shop, we had 2 3/4 floors. We got rid of that middle floor, and again, Lowe's experience coming back to me was we had just closed the Lowe's store that was where the Belk's building is now, and is at Dunham's, the sporting goods store. That whole store was Lowe's store. It was a 65,000-foot store, and we put in the current store, which was a 115. And when we closed out that 65, they were selling everything out of it, and I went up and bought 2 runs of racking. And I took that racking, I was raised in that. I mean, right. That's what I was used to. And, I ran DC Ops a couple of years at Lowe's, and you lived and died by that rack. So I bought the rack, had the top sawed off so it exactly fit the 12.5-foot ceilings that we have, had it repainted light gray so it looked like new. And the shop now has racking and storage overhead. Where everybody works, everybody now, instead of having a table at the old shop, they've got it's an 8-foot rack. There's an 8-foot piece of post-form countertop that fits in an 8-foot space. You've got a you got your workspace, storage below, storage above. So
far more efficient.
And the whole bottom is storage. And,
Right.
We had 2 small refrigerators at the old shop. And we have one refrigerator in there that's about the size of a 1-car garage.
Wow.
So that's downstairs. So now, in the past, the delivery trucks came to Main Street. Now the delivery trucks come here. They gave us 3 loading zone parking spots there behind the florist for our vans. So everything comes in at the shop. It's all made there. Not much running up and down the floors now because all the product is stored there with you, either in a storage room out, at the back entrance or above you.
So your Lowe's efficiency experience has come to play once again.
It did, yeah. So to start with, I took some of my experience to Lowe's, but,
Right.
There I took, some of that experience back there. And even the night we had the fire, I mean,
Right.
I watched Lowe's have so many, I've seen stores burnt down. I've seen, roofs torn off on DCs and all kinds of things and, power outages. So we're running in loads and loads of generators.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all hands on deck. Let's get it done. I mean, I had somebody ask me one time, well, what do you guys do? I mean, Lowe's set up a command center. There were, probably 30 people out of the replenishment group that rotated through there. And I had not that many people at one time, but I had 15 people out of transportation that would rotate through there, 6 or 8 people at a time. And it was all hands on deck to get things out there quick. And I had somebody say, well, how is it that it takes FEMA 2 days to get somewhere? And as soon as the hurricane blows through, you guys are in there the next, first thing the next morning with truckloads of generators or truckloads of plywood. And I said, it's just planning. But when the florist was on fire, I stayed around and watched about 30 minutes and realized my time was more valuable knowing where the open buildings were the next day. So I left them to watch the fire. Thank you for having a fresh CD. And I went, that's some
planning tomorrow.
Some of that Lowe's training came back to me. So.
Well, we're at a good stopping place, and we're kind of maybe where we were before. And that idea is it pays to know a few things, doesn't it?
It pays to know a few things and use your life experience. So, you use it everywhere and you try to pass it on. So,
yeah, great. Steve, well, this has been a fantastic time of getting to know more of the intimate story about City Florist and how it went through its transformation period and how you're still open today and so many people still think of City Florist in such a warm and kind way.
Well, it's a totally refurbished building because we threw out all of our displays. We got rid of any old product. We had lots of gifts. I think the folks down at Ebenezer's first were grateful, but I ended up taking 4 van loads of product down there that, we had put on sale. And if it didn't sell, I took it down there and we got in all new stuff, new vendors, new displays, new everything. So it revitalized the shop, and we had, existing customers that have been with us for years, but a lot of new customers come in.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Steve, we'll see you next time.
Thank you for spending time with us on Life in Wilkes. We value you as a viewer and appreciate when you share the show with your friends and family. Be sure to bookmark our channel and join us again on the next episode of Life in Wilkes.